Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Mr. Money Invest. Now, you probably heard a lot about Silicon Valley Bank or SVB, but what is it really about? And should we really even care? Now, let's find out. Earlier in March, Silicon Valley Bank or SVB suffered a bank run. A lot of people rushed to the bank all at the same time to withdraw their money. $42 billion was the amount of money withdrawn within a day. And the bank got into trouble. To help you understand what actually really happened, I need to bring you back to 3 years ago. SVB, as the name suggests, is the bank that caters to the banking needs of the startup community in the Silicon Valley. It was the go-to bank for a lot of all these businesses. During the pandemic, a lot of them made tons of money and they all deposited their money in SVB. As more and more startups started to use SVB banking services, their deposit grew by 4 times from $50 billion back in 2020 all the way up to $200 billion in 2022. That's 4 times within the span of just 2 years. Now, since there are tons of money sitting there doing nothing, SVB decided to invest their money in bonds. For those of you who are familiar with how a bond works, basically it has an inverse relationship with interest rate. We all know that when interest rate is high, the value of the bond is going to come down. Back in 2022, the Fed suddenly started increasing interest rate like crazy. Within a span of just 1 year, the Fed increased the interest rate 7 times from near zero all the way up to around 4% today. Essentially, this means that the investment that SVB made in the past before the Fed started to increase interest rate to lose in value. Actually, all this information were published in their annual report, but not many people paid attention to it. Until one day, SVB announced that the bank suffered a loss on $21 billion portfolio on their bonds and other assets to a point whereby they have to launch a 2.25 billion share sale in order to shore up their capital, which means to raise more cash. Immediately, that sends a signal that they ran out of money. Needless to say, everyone panicked. Depositors would panic. They all quickly ran to the bank. First thing they did was to withdraw whatever amount that is left in the bank before they lose everything. Now, as more and more people started to do that, SVB found themselves in deep trouble. This is when they know they f***ed up. Subsequently, it created a contagion effect on other regional banks in the US. Fear started to spread all around. People are just thinking whether the money in the bank that I'm saving right now is safe or not. Should I also follow all the SVB customers to withdraw my money from the bank? As a result, other regional banks such as First Republic and Signature Bank also suffered the same fate. At this point, we are not talking about a few banks collapsing. Could this lead to the collapse of the entire banking system? If that happens, it's going to be a disaster for the world. Because if the banking system fails, all of your money will be gone. Now, here comes the question. Can this also happen in Malaysia? Is our money safe in our banks? To answer that, we need to understand how our bank works. Now, you see, when we have money, what do? We put the money in the bank as deposits. And what the bank does with our deposit is that they will split our money into 2 portions. The first portion will be put away as a buffer in case anybody comes to the bank to do daily banking transactions. And the second portion of the money will be used to do investment. Why? A bank being a bank, they will do all these investments to make more money in order to pay your interest in your FD. Now, depending on how much risk the banks wants to take, it needs to balance out between the buffer money and the investment that they are undertaking. That is to say that they have to make sure they have enough cash in the buffer to protect themselves in case anything bad goes wrong with their investment. Now, there are 2 ways to see if a bank is safe. Firstly, the bank should have so much cash in their buffer that if something bad happens, they are able to use these funds to maneuver things around. And secondly, the investment that the bank undertakes should be something that is manageable for the bank so that if anything goes wrong with their investment, it is the amount of money that they can afford to lose without jeopardizing depositors' money. Essentially, all this thing is known as the capital adequacy ratio, where it compares the capital that the bank has against the risk that the bank is taking with their investments. Actually, there's a global standards for banks to follow when it comes to the capital adequacy ratio. And the minimum capital that a bank must have in their buffer is at least 10% of the total reserve that they have. The problem is, in the US, smaller banks like SVB, they are not required to comply with the capital adequacy ratio. In fact, I'm not even sure if SVB themselves know what is their CAR, their capital adequacy. Lucky for us in Malaysia, our capital adequacy ratio is quite high. As we can see here, it is on an uptrend from a low of 17.8 back in October 22, and today we are at 18.9 in the early 2023. This means our banks are quite safe. We are very far ahead from what the global standard is, 10%. Since the 1997 Asian financial crisis, we have been super prudent with how our banks operate in Malaysia. That gives a lot of confidence for people to save their money with our banks. Remember in the beginning of the video, I asked if we should care about what is happening so far away from home in the US? The truth is, a bank run could happen anywhere in the world. And looking at where we are right now as Malaysians, our banks are strong fundamentally. Bank Negara has also put in place all the necessary precautions such as the PIDM insurance and making sure all the banks in Malaysia comply to the strict regulation that is put in place. When people are confident with our banks, I think we will be okay. So that's what I think about Malaysian banks, but tell us in the comments of what you think of our situation. Should we even be worried about what is happening in the US? Now, see you in the next video.